India will need to now balance its diplomatic pragmatism with need to ensure that it safeguards its own sovereignty. Over the last 1 year, or 2 years rather, the conversations that we've had with vis-a-vis Ladakh is that India is ceding its territory to China. I think this is where one needs a reality check that India is, of course, trying to be diplomatic, but at the same time, its sovereignty is of great importance.
There is no doubt we are talking of a boundary which is the longest disputed boundary on planet Earth right now. This is between world's two inordinately largest population nations, which are nuclear weapon states, very powerful militaries on both sides. The terrain is very, very complex. It's not very easy to know whose border is where in many places. So there is areas of confusion even on line of actual control. So definitely that will continue to be requiring enormous caution and calibration of policy vis-a-vis China for any coming amount of time. But these 4 years, the way India stood up on the border in heavy forward deployments and kept patience, opening dialogues wherever it is possible, should now give China a clear message that it's 2 steps forward, 1 step backward, or its next strategy of checking the staying power of its adversary, right, or who blinks first have not worked when it comes to India. So from that lesson, Chinese, I suppose, should stop thinking about physical geographical expansionism vis-a-vis India at least, but Chinese expansionism in other ways. For example, its Belt and Road Initiative, its engagement with India's immediate neighbors, and in rest of the world, in Africa and so on, will continue. So it's not just end of one particular kind of expansionism. It will find its ways in many other ways where China's influence and prowess will be seen growing and impacting other nations, including India. And therefore, India will have to constantly stay aware, awake, and calibrate its responses very, very carefully. I think last 4 years is a good lesson that China has learned from India. Absolutely. And hopefully it will make sure that it doesn't really rub India on the wrong side.
At this point in time. Professor, given the history of border conflict with China, how sustainable is the recent de-escalation in both Depsang and Demchok? And in your assessment, what steps should the two countries take at this point to ensure that the peace really holds?
Shweta, for last 3 decades or so, two sides, India and China, have already put in place about a dozen of various MOUs and agreements to that effect of ensuring peace and tranquility on the border, and about half a dozen various levels of mechanisms of constant conversations with each other, starting from the special representatives at the top to flag meetings on the border, as General would bear me out on this. So there is no dearth of arrangements that can ensure peace and tranquility on the border, except that both sides at the very apex level have to indicate that intention. And I think that is what happened in Kazan, when Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping met and said, now we are ready and we want to now de-escalate the situation. So starting with disengagement. But disengagement fundamentally means going back from the eyeball to eyeball kind of very heavy forward deployments. But in current, way the armies operate, there are also several quasi-permanent structures, for example, bunkers and so on, which will continue to ensure that we suspect each other all the time. So de-escalation is going to take some time. But meanwhile, they are also beginning to talk of several border-related issues. For example, India is very insistent on hydrological data for river water sharing that India and China does should be revived, should be provided by China to India, or the pilgrimage route to Mansarovar should be opened up. We don't know which side of the route will open, whether it is through Lipo Lake or through eastern route or through Nathula. So still border related, several issues are still being gradually implemented. But to your larger question of whether we can trust China, I think broadly no nation can easily trust any other nation, particularly when relations are competitive, adversarial. So that question will continue to linger, which means we have to very seriously focus on building trust with each other. And for that, I think the big question now is patrolling. And I think the focus of recent 21st October agreement was to, rearrange how the patrolling on this line of action control has to be done. because that is where frictions arise again and again, and that is where tensions happen again and again, as your colleague was just mentioning. So that's a work in progress, but the good side is that the leaders at the apex level have given that indication together that they want to stand down now from the tensions together, and therefore very rapid pace of engagements. For example, foreign ministers delegation level meeting, which has already given in media about 5 or 6 topics that were discussed in that meeting. So arrangements are in place, but once you have this, broader strategic direction from the national leaders, and they can move pretty forward very quickly. 30 seconds more. I think China is also thinking of President Donald Trump likely to visit India before summer next year,
right?
Because we are hosting the summit meeting of Quad, and they want to catch up and resolve issues with India as much as possible before that visit takes place.
Swaran Singh, he's Centre from International Politics, JNU. Also with us is retired Lieutenant General Sanjay Kulkarni. He's a defence and geopolitical expert. With me in the studio is my colleague Nivriti Mohan. Nivriti, I want to come to you first. Thank you very much for taking time out, as well as to the two gentlemen. The border tensions and the conflict